Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we have Juri Strumpflohner. Juri, thank you so much for joining us. How you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this one, and I'll talk a little bit more about why after we've taken a moment to talk about you. Do you want to give us a bit of a background on yourself?
Yeah, sure. As you said, my name is Yuri. I'm from northern Italy. Now with Now already for a couple of years. I'm there currently in the role of the director of developer experience. So currently focusing a lot on content production, helping out the community. So that's also why I'm excited to jump on this show.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a whole lot of fun. And so we're talking today about the problem of monorepos, right? I think that a lot of people, as they work in bigger companies and on more complex projects, they find themselves in this really challenging spot where we have a ton of code, we have a ton of teams, and it's just painful to try to work together, right? Like, from my own personal
Yeah,
experience, I've been
exactly.
on teams where each team in the company has their own set of repos. And in order to launch, I have to go across each team in the company and say, hey, we're going to launch. Like, have you run your test? Have you run your test? Have you run your test? And then we all coordinate hitting the button at the same time. And inevitably something goes wrong and there's a lot of chaos. And then I've also been in companies where everybody works out of the same code base, but that means that you're constantly having to like rebase your repo and you're running into merge conflicts and you've got a lot of equally frustrating complexity around all this. So this is an area where you have a lot of expertise, and chat, I'd love to hear your stories as well. Like, are you using a monorepo at work? Are you, have you used them before? What's your general sense of them? And so Yuri, if you want to just maybe talk a little bit about like monorepos in the abstract, right? Like how
Yeah,
are
sure.
we managing code at scale?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, like you pointed already out like some very good points, right? And the whole monorepo thing, like they have been around for quite a long time, especially on the
Mm-hmm.
backend side. Like they've existed for quite a while. Think about an X, for instance, like an X is already like 5 years old, so it's not something like super new, right? Although recently it got much more attention in the JavaScript community and in that space, right? So, and the main thing, like when you start thinking about a monorepo is usually, as you correctly said, when you want to like try help teams develop together in a more
Right.
optimal way, right? So usually what, as you said, like what you have is like you have different repositories, teams working like more separate from each other, but inevitably there are some pieces where you need to collaborate, right?
Mm-hmm.
It could also be that one team just, for instance, handles like the UI design component thing. Like that is usually like one of the common things you see, right? Like someone handling the UI design guidelines and the components to share with others, like in the company. And so they work kind of isolated in their own repository, and then they just like publish versions, right? Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
if you can, like you publish it just to the open, like to npm or somewhere, right? If you cannot, like it gets even more complicated because like, you then have to set up like internal private registries, and like it gets much more enterprisey, right? But what we see mainly, and that's also, for instance, like what we do with our clients when we work with them, is we help them like set up such monorepos, right? Because like then you circumvent a lot of those kind of like isolations.
Mm-hmm.
And for instance, teams that work like on design guidelines and design components, they can try out and experiment very quickly, very easily, right? Because they're sitting in the same monorepo. So it's all about
Right.
just creating a branch, testing out a couple things, right? See how it works in different apps, and then immediately like you get much more confident of when you release.
Gotcha. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Um, quick chat. Are you getting a lot of audio blowback from me? I made a bunch of audio changes because I was having issues with the setup before and we were getting clipping. So
Yeah,
I've rewired everything and I just want to make sure everybody can. Okay, he's echoing. Hold,
I
please.
I hear you good.
Just gonna throw some headphones on and avoid this problem altogether. Here we go. Here we go. How about now?
I hear you good.
Okay, great. So that should eliminate the echo. So if anybody hears any echo, just let me know. Good. All right. So yeah, I think your point about like the ability to iterate and experiment quickly, that also brings up something that I have run into a lot, which is like, I have this tension that I constantly feel around when I'm working on a project. There's a piece that I feel would be useful if I published it as a package. So, for example, I have this social image generator, and it's just a little piece of code.
Sure.
Published it on NPM, and then I'm in another site and I want to use that piece of code, and I realize I need a feature, so I want to build it, and I'm like, oh crap, okay, so now I have to go over to my other repo, and I'm publishing an alpha version, and I'm hitting all these and like, I always screw up my NPM launches, so I'm like bumping patch minor, and then I'm like, oh crap, I just broke everything. Okay, so now it's a major. And all of that could have been avoided if I was able to work right in the code. So then the opposite tension is, I'm like, well, maybe I should just copy paste this code between projects so that it's easier for me to iterate on, right?
Yeah.
And
we
that's
actually
just
see
me
that
as
a
like
lot.
one
Like,
person.
yeah.
And so is this something that like, would you reach for a monorepo to solve those types of problems as well? Like, how do you apply monorepos in your own dev?
Yeah. The thing about monorepos is like, people always think they have to be huge, right? Like when you hear people talk about monorepo, many like immediately say like, oh well, that I'm not having that case, right? I'm not Google, I'm not Microsoft, which are known for having those gigantic monorepos within their companies, right? So a monorepo can really also be like, I don't know, you have an open source library, would you want to split up in multiple packages, right? And it makes sense to have them like in the same repository, right? So you have like maybe like 4 different libraries, right? The core library, and then different extensions for, I don't know, different UI systems. If you build like a new UI type of library, or different utilities, right, that target different frameworks. So you already have a monorepo in that sense, right? So they can be pretty small as well, even if you start with one application. And that's also what we see often, right? Like people start with one application, they split it up into smaller libraries, and then only later at some point, like they realize, well, let's add another application, right? Because it makes sense and it is easy because we are already in the monorepo, right? Or we have that environment that allows us to quickly add some new application and link to existing libraries. So like you don't have to start huge, right? You don't have to think about like those gigantic repositories immediately from the get-go, but you can start small. Like you can have like one library, one demo application, publish that to GitHub, so you have like everything like wired together, easily maintainable, right? And so over time, naturally what happens is like you will add multiple ones, like you will add like new ones, right? But like sometimes people are kind of hesitant, like they see, well, in theory, I should split it up in a different library, but then like that would mean like you need to set up like new repository, new CI, and so they don't do it, right? And so that's also one thing that you often see. And
Gotcha.
even in companies like the clients we work with, for instance, or which I've been working with and consulting with in terms of more the monorepo area, it's not that they have like one gigantic repositories, right? Some of them can get quite huge, right? But they can even have like multiple ones, like in the sense of per huge domain area or sub organization might exist in those larger Fortune 500 companies, right? So you can split them even up, right? And it's not that you cannot publish, right? So you can even have like a monorepo, and then that one library in there, that utility one, you still want to publish it to an internal repository, an NPM registry or something, because like not everyone is in the same repo, right? But others might still want to benefit. So it's not that you cannot do that, but yeah, like that's usually the approach we take. Start small and then scale as you see like you need more, and basically on an as needed basis.
So, okay. Yeah. So this is I mean, this is like, I like the idea of making it flexible, and you know, I recognize that there's no one size fits all solution when it comes to code organization. You can't just say like, do it exactly like this and all your problems go away. It's very much organizationally dependent, team dependent, habit dependent. But are there any things that you've seen that are like very clearly, whenever teams adopt this strategy or they stop doing this thing, it makes a night and day difference in the way that they manage their code?
Yeah, I think like the main benefit which we see coming out of this whole like monorepo approach and like going into that direction is the collaboration aspect, right? Because like a monorepo, like although you could basically have your poly repos, right, and just merge them in one Git repo and don't change anything else in how you work, right? So you would technically have a monorepo in a sense of like just one Git repository, right? But it wouldn't give you any type of benefits, right? Usually the benefits start happening once you start sharing code among teams, right? So like you create like, because like that's what emerges usually, right? Like you have someone, like especially the lower level libraries that are more utility, authentication, what like design libraries, as we mentioned before, like those are per se shareable. And so once you are in that situation where you can share, those things will naturally kind of evolve. But it's
Sure.
also to be said that you also need to put guardrails in place at that point, right? It's like if you just like jump in a monorepo scenario where like, yeah, let's just throw everything into one repository and then let people go and do their work. Well, it's not how that happens, right? So yeah, monorepos can help like facilitate communication and like share code, but like you still need to do some additional work on that side as well, right? So it's not for free completely.
Yeah. And so this is where, we can kind of transition into talking a little bit about a specific tool, which is NX that you work on. And when we start talking about the kind of structure of a monorepo and not just chucking all your code into a single repo, how, like, which guardrails am I setting up on my own versus which guardrails can I rely on the tools to set up for me?
Yeah, so structure-wise, like if we talk specifically about NX, like it is pretty flexible in the sense that you can have like multiple just packages in there that you might be more accustomed to if you come from the learner world, right? Where you just have like a packages folder and a bunch of packages in there. And that's an approach which we see a lot people using NX, for instance, for their open source repositories. Because there you have different packages you want to publish. There might be dependencies between those packages, right? Naturally. But nothing more, right? So, and then you might have maybe a demo app or something alongside those packages that live in the same monorepo. And a project we adopt a lot is more a division about like applications and libraries. And so what that means is basically you could think about them like having your usual, I don't know, create React app setup, right? Where you have like the React application or Angular application or whatever you're using or accustomed to use. And what you do there is you naturally usually divide them into like subfolders, right? Per feature, per domain, per team, whatever. Like you need some sort of separation, right? And so in an NX repo, what we recommend at that point is not like just to keep them in a library, like in a folder within the same application, but rather create such a workspace library, right? The library that lives in the monorepo, but it is an individual piece like split out of the application. It does not necessarily mean like other apps need to consume it, right? But you have it there and isolated. And already that alone gives you like some more benefits in the sense of like having the team more focused on like a smaller piece, having a clear like public API structure if you want, right? Where you can consume certain pieces. So that's usually the structure which we recommend, right? And from there, you can then, and that to your question, like that gives you already some kind of guardrail in the sense that you recommend teams, okay, like this is the approach you should go, right? The app should be as thin as possible. It's really just like your deployment container, if you want, where you group libs into the application, right? But logic and the stuff happens in the libs, right? And then as you start, like that's perfectly fine, and usually you're good to go. And then like as new applications come in, you need to start to think about like, okay, now I need to think about like which apps can import which libs, right? Because like there might be some libraries which are exclusively to be consumed by one application rather than a different application, right? And so at that point, you need to kind of tool that supports you with that, right? That kind of puts those guardrails in place, such that like, especially new developers that come into the monorepo might not know about, but just so they don't accidentally pull in libraries, NPM packages, or also workspace libraries.
Yeah. So, I mean, and like thinking about this from a practical application standpoint, if we run through let's call it just a hypothetical scenario. So I'm running, let's say I've got my company, and my company has a public package that we've deployed, and it's like a utility that we provide to the open source ecosystem. And then we have a demo site that shows like the docs and how to use that package. And then we also have our company site, which is what spawned the use of that library in the first place. So I would have in my lib folder the npm package that I'm publishing, and then I would have two apps. I would have the like package demo site, and I would have my company site, and each of those apps I would have some kind of like quality check in place, right? So let's say my lib is something that can be unit tested. I can go through and have my company app test to make sure that whatever changes I make in the library don't break my app. And the demo site,
Exactly.
we have all the various use cases that we want to run through, and that's kind of a solid integration test of making sure that my library does what we say it does. When I'm working on any one of these, so I want to make some changes to my library, does NX have the automation in place so that I can say like, okay, I've got a change ready for my library, run the tests against everything that consumes it, and tell me if I just broke things?
Yeah, totally. Like that is one of the vital pieces that you need to have. Because like that's exactly the problem that I mentioned kind of initially. Like if you just naively jump into a monorepo scenario where you
Right.
just like throw a bunch of like libs and apps and stuff into a single Git repository, right? But if you don't have the tooling in place, then like yeah, initially it will be fun and nice, right? But then like as you grow, like in half a year in, like you kind of regret your choice for a monorepo and you will like back out again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, that's something which like NX, for instance, helps with in a sense that it internally kind of builds up what we call like is a project graph. So it is able to read the source code and understand, okay, like app one, like the company side imports that library, right? As well as
Mm.
like the doc side pulls in that library via the import statements, right? And so internally behind the scenes, NX builds up that dependency graph. And that is kind of the core structure that is then used for a variety of different optimization strategies. And one of them is like the one you mentioned, where you can say, okay, like build whatever got affected. Like that, those are the so-called affected commands, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
Next would say, yeah, you changed that lib down there, and based on the project graph, I know those two other applications depend on it. So I need to run the tests or build or end-to-end tests, whatever you have set up, right?
Yeah,
And so yeah, that's vital. That's vital.
that's
Otherwise,
very
otherwise,
cool.
like your CI times will skyrocket.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's kind of what I always worry about it when you start looking at monorepos, because I thinking about like various experiences I've had on this. I when I was working at IBM, for example, we had a lot of shared tools, but we didn't have that structure of shared tests and making sure that things worked. So there was this very manual and very time consuming process of whenever you touched a library that affected other people's code, you just kind of had to own going to every team and like opening a PR that ran that thing. And then if they didn't have tests, you had to do manual QA to make sure that your changes didn't affect their stuff. And there were a lot of really complex steps. And, if you didn't do it all in one day, half your work would go out of date because they'd push changes tomorrow. Right. And so it was this very
Yeah.
like urgent and stressful and time consuming manual process to push out changes. Um, and so this, by putting things in a monorepo that's got this dependency tracking, and you can test affected apps, you make it less of a human. You have to remember to go check every repo that's affected, which means you have to figure out who's using this repo, which is another huge problem when you've got dozens of teams in a
Yeah.
company,
Yeah.
or even just like four. You know what I mean? Like you got like two,
Yeah.
three
Yeah.
teams
Totally.
that use a thing that you built, and you don't work with that team. You have no idea if they installed it or if they uninstalled it or if they've like forked it and now it's completely different anyways. And like so there's all this just like little stuff that you have to go deal with. That's a
Yeah.
big
Yeah.
pain. Um, but there's
Yeah.
another thing.
It's even
Oh, go ahead.
already because you don't even know like which version you're consuming, right? So
Right.
it's all about in the end like shortening that whole feedback loop, right? It's like if you're in the same repo and you make that change, you push it up, and your PRs will run through. It will run all the tests and builds and stuff, right? So you will immediately see,
Mm-hmm.
okay, like app 1, 2, 3 are breaking, right? So I should rather like either look into it, and maybe you're able to figure it out because like, ultimately you made the change in your library. So
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes you're actually able to figure out like, oh yeah, sure, that's public API changed it, cannot do that, right? So or I need to fix the consuming code, right? Or reach out to those teams that work on those apps, right? Like
Absolutely.
the contrary problem would be like you just like you publish a release candidate. Maybe you have like an internal mailing list where people subscribe to that to consume your library, and you hope that they are going to test it, right? You maybe wait a week or so, and then you release the public version, but like only just like a handful of teams upgrade to the latest one, right? And like the
Mm-hmm.
other team maybe like upgrades like in 2 months from now, and then they will reach out, oh, our app is breaking, right? And you're like, okay,
Right.
what is going on, right? So like it's that feedback loop like can be really, really, really long, right? Rather than being like instant as you make the change,
Yeah.
right?
And talking about this reminded me of what I think, because I've had we've talked about NX on this show before, and one of the moments that I think really blew my mind talking about NX was when we started talking about private packages, because this is something that is every company I've ever worked in, it's a huge pain, because it's not just like we have a private package, but like you have a private package, and then you got to figure out like package management. Where does it live? How do you protect it? All these keys and stuff. And then for everybody who wants to use it, you've got to walk them through updating their like npm config, or some other config file in their local machine that has the right like username, password, or access token, so that they can actually download these packages for local dev. And it's like, oh my god, it's just so much complex work that has to be done to let somebody do local dev. And I know personally I have lost developer days to this, like just fully blown an entire day trying to hunt down the right person who has the access token, who can explain where this private package came from, and so on and so forth. And something that NX does that I think is really, really cool is if I put a private package as a lib in my monorepo, I can install it in my apps like an npm package. So I just do like, at company private / package name. But I don't have to publish it. I can just pull it out of that libs folder. So our mono repo becomes our private package manager. And holy Christmas, does that make a huge difference in the level of complexity involved with sharing that private internal code.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you don't even like, there's no, actually, if you live in that monorepo, like in that case, like with NX, but even like alternative solutions, right, have the same approach where you just directly consume the library that lives within the same source code. Now, if you like use, for instance, something like Yarn Workspace or npm Workspace, like in that moment, like they really install it into the node module. So you have like a link basically in your node modules that points to those libraries. In NX, you can totally have that as well. But like if in the default setup, for instance, you don't even need to do that, right? Like it directly uses TypeScript and path mappings to like have something, as we mentioned, like some npm scope, which is usually like your workspace name or your company name or something like that, right? / the library name. And that would just like over the TypeScript path mappings point to a folder that lives in that libs folder, right? So it even consumes directly from source. So there's no publishing and what's so on like going on.
Yeah.
Right? So, which obviously like makes the whole process a lot easier.
Yeah. So I think, to make sure that we leave enough time to do some coding here, to kind of to maybe try to take everything we talked about and put a little bit of a bow on it. When it comes to monorepos, your guidance is they're very helpful no matter what scale you're at, but you do have to do the work up front to make sure that you organize things well and add the right like tests and other guardrails to make sure that you can identify when your changes affect other things.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously NX helps you with that, like as we might see in a demo, right? So as you go, like NX has features that allows you to put up those guardrails, or it even automates that in the process of generating something, in the process of generating your library, right? So, but yeah, totally. You need to have some things in place, such as like you basically either a tooling or something like that, like in that case, an X, for instance, that kind of guides you along, right? So such as like it's not gonna be a nightmare and a couple months in. So.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah. So I think that's probably a good transition point for us. So why don't we jump over into our pair programming view, which I will do right now. And check out this new background. I'm very happy with this. You get the transparent terminal, like, ooh, right? Nice. Neat. But so let me start by doing a quick shout to our captioning, which is happening right now. And I didn't have the window open, so I'm going to pull it over here. And we have Vanessa with us today from White Coat Captioning, who is taking down all these words to make the show more accessible. That is very much appreciated and made possible through the support of our sponsors. So Netlify, NX, thank you very much, and Backlight. So we are talking to Juri today, who you can follow at Juri STR on Twitter. Let me drop that into the chat. And if you want to follow along with the captions, they are on the homepage of learnwithjason.dev. You can find them there, along with links to Whitecoat Captioning and our sponsors. And we are talking about nx.dev, right? Boy, am I glad I got that right on the first try. So, and I believe that is the extent of things that I know about what we're doing today. So I will now ask you for guidance as we continue forward here.
Yeah, sure. I would say we can start creating a React application, a React monorepo.
Okay,
right?
so let me make a directory, and I'm going to call this React monorepo nx. Okay, so I'm in a completely empty folder here. I'm ready to roll.
Yeah, and then like we can use the create-nx-workspace command, like with npx prefixed. Exactly, we can directly run
nx
that
workspace like that.
Workspace,
and pass it like
and
this
then we will
folder.
give it. Yeah, you don't even need to provide a folder; will automatically pick it up where we are right now.
Oh,
what we need to give it, or what we can give it is usually an organization name or something. So we could use like learn with JSON or whatever we'd like to.
Okay.
To do.
And
this will be the like npm scope, basically.
Something like this.
Or you can directly just add it, just as the first name, and then we can go with that.
Okay, I'm gonna make it shorter so it's easier for us to type and call it LW.
I was about to say like this is the npm scope, so we have to might have to type it a couple of times. Yeah, and what you see now is basically just a walkthrough of what we want to set up. An Axis interior, like, it is technology agnostic, so we could even like integrate backend applications into it, but it's definitely optimized for more the front end space. And so here we just see a couple of presets that it comes with, right? So the first two are more an empty preset where you just roll everything on your own. You add the plugins as you go, right? In our case, we would probably want to go with the React one because it already sets up like Babel and stuff for us. So we have to do less work basically in the end, right? So if you know it's primarily going to be React, then that's what we would go with.
Okay, and so
then we can give it an application name.
Okay, so we'll just go with site because that is easier to type. Do you have strong opinions, or can I just roll plain CSS?
Yeah, I would. Yeah.
All right, we'll go plain CSS.
Cool.
NX Cloud.
And this is NX Cloud. This is basically the distribution of the caching on top of NX, right? So NX comes with a so-called computation caching.
Okay.
And if you want to distribute it across teams, then you kind of can add in the NX Cloud plugin. And we can totally just like use that. You don't have to register immediately. You don't even have to register at all, and can immediately like benefit from it.
Okay.
It's basically, as it says here, it's kind of free for most workspace, meaning like you have. And this cloud basically uses hours saved in a sense that like if it saves you half an hour or something like in your build, because like it pulls that out of a cache, you would like add that to its count. And a couple months ago, like we opened up NX Cloud, like with like every workspace gets 500 hours per month for free. And so we figured like for most, if you're not really like a super huge enterprise, which probably want to go with like more private cloud and Docker setup, container stuff like that anyway, you probably like never gonna hit that limit. So that's why I actually put here. It's free. It's basically free for everyone.
Cool.
Very cool. Now basically the workspace gets set up, and since we have chosen React, we'll see it will set us up like with like the React package and a couple of those things that might be useful.
Great. And so this that we're setting up, here we go. NX Cloud has been enabled, and I'm just going to open this up so we can take a peek at what happened in here. So here is our repo. And I can see in here we've got our scoped app, and then we've got apps and libs. And okay, so I did a couple things that I didn't want to do. Let me Is the scope tied to the folder name? Like if I change the folder name, is that going to break it?
Yeah, the scope. Well, not necessarily. Like you can change the folder name totally. It's just wired up internally, basically. If that folder, like if you rename the top level folder, that's fine.
Because I was just thinking of publishing the repo like this and having
this I see.
Learn with JSON. So if I drop this a folder level up, which I can
That
do
should totally
by
work.
opening this. Let's go in here, GitHub, learn with JSON, React Monorepo NX, and then I'm going to take this up, copy this. We're going to delete that folder and then rename this one, right? And then I'm going to, am I still in this folder? Yes. I'm going to git init so that
Okay, cool.
okay, so we'll try that one more time. And that is open. Okay, so why don't you see? I'm going to close this and reopen it because I want it's ignoring everything. And I think that's just a symptom of me having opened it before I initialize the Git. There we go. Okay, so now I can see. Okay. So we've got our apps and libs, like you mentioned. Okay, that's very cool. Let me make this bigger so we can see what's going on. And we've got, let's see, NX console extension is recommended. Should I install this?
Yeah, we will need that later for sure. So we could just go ahead and add that. That's basically whenever you set up that NX workspace, it comes with like that Visual Studio Code recommendations file for extensions.
Nice.
This is one developed by the core team at NX. So to basically help you, if you're not basically the CLI type of guy that wants to type out every command, like this is definitely useful for exploring what is possible within the workspace.
For sure. Okay, so then let's just let's start where I always start, which is by peeking at the package JSON. We can see that we've got core.js, React, React DOM, a couple things for Babel and stuff, and then we've got some narwhal things that are related to NX types.
Exactly.
Babel, some ESLint plugins, prettier. So pretty standard app setup from what I've seen.
Exactly. And this basically varies depending on which setup you chose, right? Like, so the React preset pulls in a couple of, especially those novel libraries. If you would have chosen, for instance, like with an empty one, right, you would get basically an X, and that's more or less it.
Gotcha.
And then you need to basically pull in whatever you need along the way.
Got it. Okay. And then I see this nx.json, and that's so this would be like if I have a private package that I'm not going to actually publish, but I want to be able to install, it would be at LWJ and then the name of the package. Is that the correct way to think about it?
Yeah. So the NX.json here basically is a metadata config file, if you want, that NX itself reads whenever it runs commands, right? So this is where you could customize stuff in here. The whole and that LWJ, the learn with JSON npm scope, that would be the one that you use when you consume libs within your workspace. However, like technically the setup is not just happening here, but that is basically happening that tsconfig base, which you see further down there, right? So that's a normal TypeScript feature where basically you see those path variables down here, which right now is empty. Right. But whenever we now then later maybe start adding a library or something, it would use that npm scope, right, and create the path mapping according to that npm scope.
Gotcha.
And point it to whatever lib folder you created.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so so then we've got our folder full of libs, which is empty, and we've got our app, which is the site that we set up. And if we look in here, this looks pretty familiar as a React app.
Yeah.
I see tsconfig. We've got a project.json, which is this related to NX?
Yeah, exactly. So this is basically wrapping the tasks that we can execute on a project, right? So NX actually allows you, or would allow you, to have like also package.json here and just use plain npm scripts. I would pick up those. But once you want to have like a more involved setup, in this case, for instance, like a WebEx setup that compiles in a bunch of stuff, like use maybe a different CSS styling setup like Sass or style components, whatever, right? Then in here you can customize that. And the thing here is what you see is that the main point is if that targets array, that targets object. So if you collapse that, for instance, we see like the different targets. So within the targets, basically, if you collapse the build, exactly, you see here we have targets pre-configured for build, serving, linting, whatever. And these are basically, you can imagine those as being your npm scripts, right? The entry points. So you can use NX to run like the build serve, and depending on like.
Is this the console tools that's adding this?
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the
Very
features
cool.
that it automatically reads that file, and so you can just like with the code lens feature of Visual Studio Code, run it directly this way by clicking
Nice.
it.
And
And
so
the whole point
if I
here
like
is
click
like,
this, does that just start
yeah,
the
just go ahead. Yeah, that would start our service, our application. And you can actually see also the command that you can run. So you just would run otherwise like nx serve and actual
Yeah,
app, and this then kicks off the actual application.
this is cool. Okay, so I haven't used this code lens stuff. I at some point should have somebody come on and just teach that specifically. But so this is really cool. So we now have run a single command, and we have the ability to just do the nx run site serve, and then you said there was a shortcut as well to just do if we just run nx serve,
Yeah,
it'll pick up
exactly.
the site.
Exactly. You can just like use nx, the name of the target you want to run, in this case serve, and then the name of the application, which would be site in our case, right? And so it would run that specific target.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the whole point about the targets and the whole project.json is because we want to actually wrap what is going on under the hood, right? What is going on under the hood. And that, because usually what we would have like a webpack config somewhere lying around, right? Where we're then from an npm script compile it and run it with webpack in that case, right? For local development. The thing what NX also does is like it has one of the design principles to not want to break people as we upgrade over breaking changes. For instance, just like last week we released version 14, right, which we do like usually on a half a year basis. We want to migrate people automatically, right? So there's a dedicated command which is NX migrate, which would bring you from a previous version of NX, including things like dependencies of React, Jest, ESLint, whatever you use, to the next version, right? And so in order to be able to do that, you need a certain level of abstraction around
Yeah,
what you do, right? Because like you can extend the local config here in a custom webpack config, but we all know like how difficult that is to maintain over time, right? And not
absolutely.
even to think about to migrate that automatically. So that's basically one of the reasons why we have like those project files in there, because it's actually data that the next can consume to reason about your workspace and what is going on in the end.
Well, cool. All right. So we now have a running site, and we've done very little to get that running. We just had to run that create npx workspace, and now I think we're in a place where we can kind of start making some changes. So if I go into my app, we've got let's see, the nx welcome. So if I was going to do something here, I could like drop this off, and we could say like, let's do a H1, and that H1 will be one of these. And then if there we go. All right. So now we're building some stuff. But I'm serious about this site. I want it to be really scalable, maintainable. I want to build some kind of a package library that I can install that will give me some reusable pieces. So the most visual thing would probably be a design system. Or like some shared components.
Yeah.
So if I wanted to do that,
Yes, exactly. So the next step could be to exactly do that. And since we have NX console installed, and that's actually what I recommend, like most that are new to NX workspace. So you can go to the documentation, to our docs, which are pretty good. And so you explore from there, which so-called generators you have, which are there for basically creating new code basically in your NX workspace, right? So you don't
okay.
have to kind of do that on your own and figure it out on your own. Basically, if you go further down, for instance, you see an API coming in. There's the workspace structure,
Guides.
some guides on how to create it. And then there's the API, for instance. Here we see like the React one, for instance.
Okay.
It's basically in the middle somewhere, right? And so there you see already like those generators being mentioned, for instance, the library generator,
Okay.
or like Redux generator, stuff like that, right? So we could go from here, kind of copying the commands and trying to understand how they work, or like just use a more visual approach and use NX console, right, to set up that library.
And now NX
And
console
so you should,
is built in here,
yeah,
so I
exactly,
can go here.
yeah, exactly. You can go
Ooh.
at the very top, click generate, and then just like choose library in this case. Exactly, we would want to use a
Neat.
React library. And this what this does basically is just it reads the React library package. It understands there's the so-called generator with some metadata of like flags it accepts, and it renders it as a form, right? And so now here you can start basically like giving it a name in a more visual way, right? You don't need to know the command. You can just like go with a name such that. Exactly.
Okay. And if I leave this, does this will it just default or?
Yeah, this is fine. Actually, in the terminal below, what you will see is as you make the changes behind the scenes NX console, just
Mhm.
below, basically, you will see it will do dry runs, right? So it will actually run the command.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So on the side, exactly. Here you see what would happen, right? Like you see it would create like in the libs folder, such a shared components folder and a couple of components, right? And so as you change the settings above, it will do dry runs behind the scenes. So nothing happens actually on the physical file system, but it just shows you, okay, this is what you would get if you then hit the run button at the very top, right? So
Dang. Okay.
here you have variety of options. We could actually just go with the default one, and that is probably giving us most what we want. But like as we also discussed before, like here we also have the option, for instance, that publishable flag. Okay, I want to have a library in here which I don't want to just consume locally, but I also want to publish it to an npm registry, right? So this would set you up with a build config, like such a build task which you have seen before for the library itself, which otherwise you wouldn't get.
Mhm.
Same, you wouldn't get a package JSON just because you don't really need it, right? For the normal default setup where you just consume it within the workspace.
Right. And so in this case, it would be like an internal library. But if we wanted to make it
Yeah.
like something we'll consume internally, but we could theoretically publish it later, I can just check this box, and now we'll get publish a libs. You need to provide a
You
proper
would get
import
like,
path.
yeah. For publishable libraries, there's a box basically in that form here where you need to give it like an actual import path. You could just, like in our case, we have a simple library where we just have it called like shared UI or something, so that would perfectly work. However, npm has the limitation that you cannot have subpaths, right? While in the next
Hmm.
rinse you could have like a shared folder and then slash some other subfolder and so on, right? While with npm that doesn't work.
Got
And
it.
so exactly. So in this case, you would now get a package JSON and some more stuff that actually allows you to publish it also individually and not just
Very
consume it
cool.
from your workspace.
Okay. And so yeah, we can do routing. We could skip formatting, skip TypeScript. You can do a standalone config, TS strict mode, tags if we wanted it, and the unit test runner, we could have that on or not. Okay, so I think we've now got a project config, and if I just hit run, it goes.
Yep.
On we go. Okay. So then if I go to my libs, I've got shared components. There's all my stuff.
Exactly.
This is very cool.
Yeah, in this case, for instance, since you clicked like the publishable flag, it also gets its own package JSON. So we could just like compile this, bump the version there, and then you just get a normal use case which you would have even in a single repo, right? You can compile it to a dist folder and then publish it from there to some registry. And here we just
Right.
have basically a couple of components that are as a demo setup.
Yeah. Okay. So what we could do here is we could have one that would be like our shared header, right? Because that's going to be
Yep.
a thing. Probably call it like the page header for simplicity. And we would give it the props can be the shared component props, and maybe we get like a title. We'll no, let's use children actually. That seems like a good idea because then we can pass in our nav that way, right? And so we can do a like an a rel home with an href of here, and we'll just say like whatever right, and then we can drop the children right there. And you don't like this for reasons. Children props, but multiple children were provided. Oh, I know what I did.
You need to probably use props.children as well because it comes in over that one, I guess.
Props.children. That seems like it's going to be happy. Good. All right. So now we have a basic thing here, and then I don't really need a default, so I can
No, we could just remove that
off
one.
my default. And we've got some, oh yeah, I screwed that up. Get that out of here. Good, good. And then if I go into my shared styles, I can do something like, let's go with like page header, and we'll have it go, display block, margin 0, padding, we'll go to rem 5 here, and then we can do a background color of, we'll go black, color of white, like we'll just, make it simple. And then what we also need to do then to make that work is we'll do a page header, and we'll do color of inherit so that it doesn't look too janky. And then that should, it's a module.css, so we go styles, so we can just rename this to container. And so now it lines up with our container. Okay. So then now I'm running. So if I come back to my app.tsx and I instead do an import page header from LWJ, wow, it auto completed. That's amazing. I drop in, let's do a fragment. And then I'm going to say, drop in my page header. And inside of it, I'm going to put in our nav. And our nav we'll do like an href home, and then like, let's add one for about. And those are going to break, but they will work, I think. And are we still running? Like if I just go out and look, can resolve. Do I need to restart to get it to pick that up?
Yeah, let's try. Otherwise, we can check the actual path mappings. It should be fine.
Okay, so let me go back out here. Where was it? And did I run it from out here? Where did I run this from?
No, we actually used NX console. But we can just like
right.
if you use npx, or you can actually go like use the right-click menu as well. So if you go to back to the Visual Explorer of the files in your tree, exactly. If you right-click on the side project, you should see NX run. Let's try that. It should actually serve it. And now you can click serve. And then just hit enter, execute. And it should serve our application.
And there we go.
Yeah, looks good.
So lots of issues with the specifics of the styling there, but like this is pretty dang cool that how well this just ran, right? Like we have, as far as I'm concerned with my building, I'm using shared components, and that's a separate package, but NX just makes that work, right? Like that's,
if you go,
really
for
nice.
instance, now, if you go into the TS config at the very root, so there you can see how it actually gets pulled in. Now, we have an interesting case here that you also made it publishable, right? So in a normal case, you don't even have to make it publishable, because it would directly like pull it in from there. So this is the mapping also where you would need to change it in the case like you want to change the import scope or whatever, right? But at the same time, now that if you go into that shared components, we should see there a similar project JSON that we had before, right? And that project JSON should now also have a build target defined. Because like you made this publishable, meaning that you might want to publish that to an internal registry or public registry, whatever. So you want to also build that single library independently of any other consuming application, right? And so here you already have like the roll-up setup ready, basically, right? So you could just like, again, hit here the component build for that library. It would build it. You get like an output into this folder, and then you just do what you normally do, like to publish it, right? So an npm publish or whatever that is.
Extremely cool. And like, I think this is one of those things that, it's like NX is a tool. It's got a lot of buttons and it does a lot. And so you got to take time to learn the tool, but just seeing how quickly this all comes together where, I have a project, that site that's going to be consuming this package. I need that package to be available internally, but not necessarily part of the same code base, because a different team is going to handle our shared components. And that team can do whatever they want as long as they, honor this API of giving me a page header component that accepts props and has children, right? And we've got
exactly.
I should probably update this to match so that people understand what's going on there. So we get our page header props, right? And as long as that matches, you include these, then we're in pretty solid shape here. Like we can do like site title and make that a string, and then update this to be site title. If I can, oh, it'll be props.site title. I gotta props.site title. There it is. And now we have, like, if I go in here and I look, oh, look, it's broken because it's missing site title. Like, just the ability to communicate across teams through code when you start looking at the strengths of tooling, like, you know, TypeScript is incredible for this. It's such a good communication tool. And something like NX, where if you make that change in the repo at, you know, let's say we're all working off of a feature branch or whatever. If you make a change in that feature branch and I pull down those changes, my code immediately tells me where I need to make changes. That, like, it's just powerful. Like, you can just feel how much work disappeared. I don't have to call anybody. I don't have to get on anybody's calendar. I can just send them this updated stuff. And as soon as they pull the changes, like, the code communicates. You don't have to do that human layer of like, hey, you need to review this thing or that thing because we just made a bunch of changes.
Yeah, exactly. And even if you think like now technically we don't even have a monorepo, right? Like we have an app and we have an app pull in like some shared logic or some logic from a lib, right, within the same code base, right? And that's also like, I actually had published a blog post a couple of weeks ago that you can totally just use this as your React CLI if you want, right? And that's also what I recommend. So you go with the preset with React, that will set up everything for you. Because like if you think we didn't have to set up any kind of TypeScript mapping, like we didn't have that knowledge, right? We can build it up as we go, like as we learn, right, on the way. We didn't have to think about building with Webpack, with like our library with Rollup, right? Like stuff like that. Also the whole thing that the Visual Code IDE properly recognizes the path mappings and the TypeScript types from the library and stuff. We don't have to think about any of this, right? And then as you go and as you become more proficient and also as your code base gets larger, you can totally just dive in and customize it the hell out of it, right? Like you can write your own executors, you can write your own plugins, and then you get more advanced, right, where you actually dive deeper. But to get started, this is super easy, right? You don't really have to think, even if you create just a single React application from the start, right? Like rarely, if you get started with a new greenfield project, you're thinking, okay, now I'm going to create that huge monorepo, right? Rather, you're thinking about that application and how to get going quickly with that, right?
Yeah. And like, you can really see that, you know, if we start kind of breaking down what each of these things does, it's pretty easy to start identifying, like, okay, so we've got that we can talk about, but we've got apps and we've got libs. And each of these is just kind of a list of what we have and what we need. We haven't talked about the testing yet, but we can talk about that a little bit. But this feels, if you use descriptive names, obviously, then you have the ability to kind of look in here and say, like, okay, so this is the site, and then this could be the dashboard. Like, another way that I could see this working really well is as apps get complex, you start to see not just like a web property be owned by a team, but actually the whole like each route ends up owned by a team. And so we see discussion of things like micro front ends. What a great way to operate a micro front end is through this.
Yeah, you basically, that's also a recommendation which we often have, like in the sense that, which I mentioned initially, your app is really thin, right? So for each route, for instance, you would create a dedicated library, right? Which you just pull into that route in the application, and that's it, right? So the logic and also the team can focus on an app down there. And what you can do there as well, like we could actually try that out. If you go to the terminal, you can run nx graph, or previously npx to not have nx globally. So if you do npx nx graph, what this will do, it will like leverage that internal graph, and then you can click on show all projects. Exactly. What we see now is actually a visualization of how a workspace is structured, right? So right now we just have one lib, right? But as you said before, you can actually have now that application and you like create libs per route, and you would also see it like structure-wise, right? Because like maybe later on you have that route that consumes the shared components, right? Or consumes the authentication library and stuff like that, right? And speaking of microservices and like module creation in general, there's actually something like we in NX 14 we dropped support, extensive support for that. Because as you grow, for instance, what you might see is you actually want to also split your application into this vertical micro front ends, right? Which perfectly fits in this scenario, right? Where you have your side project, which, as you say, pulls in like different routes, which are then even compiled separately. So you can even like optimize or take optimization out of that, right? But yeah, this graph specifically is really powerful as you become bigger, right? As your workspace grows and as you have like more lips in that same workspace.
So we have about, call it 30 minutes before we have to wrap this episode. Did you have any specific features you wanted to show off, or is there, can we make a run at building a micro front end here?
The micro front end one, probably not yet, because we're still like optimizing some pieces out of it. So end of the week would be nicer. Like we have actually NXConf end of the week.
Oh,
and
cool.
So for that we have, we have the NXConf.
Is that virtual?
Lite. We can actually, yeah. If you go to NX, exactly this one. At the end of the week, we have basically a virtual conference where we announce like some of the features that we have building into NX 14, which includes model federation, microservices support, as well as like tons of other features. It's like a couple hours, so that's also why I call it like NXConf Lite. Will be mostly just NX Core team members, NX Cloud team members that present some of the cool stuff from that. So yeah, it's totally free. So yeah, definitely jump in, register, and like we can see you there.
Yeah. And this is one of those things that like it, if you're thinking about using tools like these, one of the best ways to figure out how they work within your setup is to be present in a space like this, because you're going to get a lot of monorepo experts in one room. Great way to validate what if the way you're thinking about a project is going to get you the best benefits. So yeah, definitely go and register for that, chat. Okay, so what with the remaining time that we have, I feel like we can show off a few different aspects of things. So what do you feel like is the best use of the remaining time to kind of keep building out here?
Yeah, sure. So there are different things we can actually like continue in the sense that now that you have, for instance, a shared component library set up, what we could do is add Storybook to that. So that's the common thing. For instance, what you see is like, okay, we're building that within the Monorepo, right? We're building that like UI library, so we could actually generate a Storybook setup for that.
Okay,
we can actually let's have a look. Usually you need to install a plugin first, but let's see whether the generator is already
so I'm gonna try generate.
Yeah, let's type Storybook. Exactly. You see there's Storybook configuration. Yeah, let's go with that. Okay. Then you need to give it a project name, which in this case would be shared-components.
If I can spell it, shared components. Okay.
Exactly. And so then you see already the write run happening below. What it does is it also sets up like Cypress for you, for instance, if you want to, because Storybook has that functionality where you can like load single components, right, within a web, within a browser. And so you can also easily have Cypress just target single component testing, but like from a UI browser perspective.
Okay.
Right. And it should also generate stories for us, right? So we have already that header component in there. So it should generate a story for us. And so we can actually go and inspect that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think like that should be good. So we can actually go ahead and just click the run button.
Okay, so here is our, let me expand this a little bit so we can see. So here's our shared components end-to-end tests. And that's installing. And now
exactly, we'll pull down now the Storybook tabs probably. And if we go, for instance,
go ahead.
If you go into the libs shared components library down there, you should already see the Storybook setup. So this is the config basically, which is the normal basically config that comes with Storybook itself. And then in the source folder, we should see some stuff related to Storybook in the sense of a story that has been generated.
In the source code here?
Yeah, in the source folder. Exactly.
Okay, so here's a spec. I don't see a story.
It doesn't look like. Let's inspect the folder, like the terminal output to see.
Oh, to see if it missed
what it
something.
printed out there.
Created fixtures examples. Good.
Represent time passed. Well, let's try it out then, just like by generating the stories directly onto the folder.
Okay.
So if you right click, for instance, on the libs there, on the libs shared storybook, and you right click here, you're directly on the shared storybook name.
Sorry, you're gonna have to say that here.
In the libs folder, basically in the
libs.
shared storybook. Yeah, exactly. If you right click on the lib folder down there, it should be the lib folder.
And then generate. Looks like you're muted.
Oh, sorry, I might have hit something. So yeah, generate, sorry.
Okay.
And then here, let's search for stories. Oh, probably that's why it didn't generate them, because we were missing the now storybook dependency.
Oh,
if you go to the
okay.
package.json at very root, because we directly generate the configuration. So if you go to the package.json at the very root of the workspace, we should have a look whether we have like the actual plugin. So NX is kind of constructed as a plugin layer. And so the now storybook should be here. That's interesting. Looks like the stories generator is missing there. Can we open up the NX console directly? If you go basically on the menu on your Visual Studio Code to the NX console here, exactly. And then if you go to generate again.
Do I have to use the storybook?
The storybook, like we can run the storybook, like that would totally work. The thing is, like, we don't have any story, so we can totally go ahead and build our own. I just wanted to explore here, because like usually if you just type stories, it should come with, oh, here it is. We just probably didn't see it before. Like if you go to React, exactly, hit that second entry here.
Aha. Okay, I know what happened. I wrote out story with a Y, and so it removed that one from my options. So that's just me getting ahead of myself.
Totally.
Okay. So if I come back up here to the shared components and I do, or was it shared component or was it lib?
It should work either way. Like in the end, like the right click menu just basically optimize out the path searching, right? So if we search stories, exactly,
okay,
then we should have like that shared components now pre-selected as the target library we're going to generate stuff. And so this should actually then generate a story for us based on the components. Let's see where that works. Doesn't look like it found something. So either, oh, that's interesting. Could be a regression bug or something. So basically what it does is like it uses the share component which you already have and generates a story for you, right? So you don't have to basically do it on your own. But you could totally go ahead and just wrap up a story on your own, basically.
Okay. And so this is one of those, like, if I create story spaces for everything detected, could I have broken it by not exporting a default?
It could be. We could try that out. It could totally be, because like behind the scenes, basically, the generator runs through and tries to identify which components are present basically in the library, and it scaffolds out stories. So this is it. Usually, once you have a couple stories, you will use those and get going from based on those.
There it is.
But like, yeah,
it required a default. So I broke it when I removed that default export.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can file a bug report later. So, but so basically, what this does is basically just scaffolds out a preset story for you. So you can see, for instance, here a site title that we have specified in there. And now we could actually run Storybook directly. Again, with NX console, right clicking, that should work.
Run.
Yeah, you need to click on the share components one. Like the one you clicked on is for the end-to-end testing, basically. But this one here, exactly.
Run Storybook.
This now has this. Yeah, this has the Storybook set up, and now you can just run it, and it should fire up a Storybook for us.
Okay, off it goes.
And so this is useful, especially to get going, right? So now, if you have already a bunch of components and you want to add like Storybook later on, you don't have to kind of think about adding them on your own first, right? But like you can already use that setup and generate stories for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you create such design libraries as you did in this case, this is super helpful, right? Because like you can publish this as documentation. You can use this to first just code, like the team responsible for the design system can use this basically to test their components and then code them individually. And then you can just basically include it into the application as we did before.
Mm-hmm. So this is, I mean, yeah, this is. I'm honestly like I didn't expect us to get this far this fast. Uh, like the fact that we were able to do all of this work this quickly. So I'm now just kind of looking at this, thinking, all right, we talked a little bit about, you know, okay, so we've built some of this where we have Storybook, we've got our shared components, we've got our app, and then we generated this end-to-end test. So what's like, if we want to show that that affected testing, where when you make a change in one, it runs a test for the others, is there a like we could do a quick test that would just make sure that the you know, whatever you enter as the title or the site title shows up in the component, and then figure out how to run that test real quick? Is there a...
Yeah, sure. So we can like now we have like 2 end-to-end tests, right? And by default we use Cypress to set those up.
Mm-hmm.
So we could either test our story in this case, right? So if we go up to that test up there, to that shared end-to-end test at the very and the apps folder basically.
Shared end-to-end here.
Yeah, exactly. So if you open up here, let's see. Oh, because it didn't pick up the story initially, so it didn't generate the test for us. So we have to do it basically on our own. So we would need to go here and create the Cypress integration test, right? We can maybe pick it up from the site end-to-end test further down. So here, exactly, we have already set up such a test, but that is for the application, right? So we could just actually copy and paste the integration folder and
There we go.
basically copy it up here. Exactly. And then here we just name it to whatever we want to name, which in our case would be probably the nav component, right?
Yeah, so let's we called it page header, so we can call it page header.
Oh yeah, page header. Yeah, that makes sense.
And then this one we would want to get page header from learn with JSON shared components. And then
yeah, is this like in the... Yeah, we don't even have to import probably the component itself. But like in this case here, what we would want to go and do is actually like with Cypress, boot Storybook, right? Load the component page in the browser and then see, okay, does it render what I want to render? And for instance, if you the Storybook is still open and running, right? So if you go to that Storybook instance, which you have seen before, like localhost 4400, exactly, like in the actual path there, you can see how Storybook, for instance, loads those up, right? And at the very end there, you see even like the arcs and everything is encoded into the URL.
Mm-hmm.
So what you basically do is you just like boot Storybook within Cypress and use that path up there to navigate the actual story.
Okay.
Right? And so
that's what we need.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now I'm going to need you to walk me through how to boot Storybook, because I have not set up a Cypress test with Storybook before.
Yeah. So basically, the URL is something like it should be iframe. Because like let's go back to the story running instance again, like the Storybook instance which we have in the browser on fourth. Yeah, exactly this one. I think there should be like if you right click within that story here and view frame source, what does it show? Like as can we see the URL maybe? But it should start with like /iframe or something. If you scroll a bit up.
iframe,
yeah, exactly.
HTML.
So here you see, yeah. Let's copy this because like this is where we want to navigate. We don't really need the navigation bar of Storybook. We just need that single page, right?
Okay.
And so we can just like use that. The ID here would be the one that we have up there, which is page header, I guess. Yeah, it should be where basically we can delete. Yeah, we can just use the page header -- primary, and from there on everything, and the rest before we can just delete, even the path, I think. Yeah, exactly. So if we then paste in this below just after the ID, basically.
in place of this?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Should be
Okay.
something like this. So let's see. Because usually this gets generated, so I don't even know it by heart. But let's just see like how this works. Because usually what you do is like you generate and copy and paste, right?
Okay.
Okay, cool.
And
And
we
now
don't
we can
need to
actually
tell it to
try.
start Storybook or anything. It'll do that for
No,
us.
that's what happens behind the scenes, right? So NX knows that these two are wired together. So in
Okay.
the project.json, we would find that the end-to-end target for the storybook would point to the actual serving of the storybook. So this is basically handled behind the scenes. So the server instance should be running. And so we just really need to go and use Cypress here and identify some piece of logic that we want to capture.
Got it. So
Now the
here,
argument, yeah, we can use .get.
get,
Exactly. And then just some CSS selector that would capture our.
and that's going to show up the way that we want it to, right? Where it shows.
Yeah. Maybe let's add some attribute to it so it's easier. Like usually what I do is, for instance, like I use a data attribute on top of the components just for the purpose of testing.
I think that's a good idea.
So you add something like, I don't know, data-test ID. I think that's some convention that Cypress recommends, for instance. I think everything written together in test ID, but it wouldn't really matter. So
okay, so we can do a get
data
test ID equals page header. Did I just do that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we can say,
and then something like should be visible or
should
even just getting the element. I think you need to, between parentheses. Yeah. Okay. Or should exist or something like that.
Let's go with, oh wow. Contain text. And then,
okay. Yeah.
Right, because we're passing it the learn with JSON.
Yeah, right.
So theoretically speaking, that's a decent test. It should show up true. So let's give it a let's give it a shot.
Yeah. So to start, basically, just stop like the storybook running right now, and then you can run basically npx, nx, and then basically the end-to-end, so E to E. We can actually, like, in order to understand like how we run this, or actually let's go to the project.json. That's probably easier even. Like that's what we did before. So if we go here in project.json, that's where we would go if you don't know how to boot it. So here in the end-to-end test, you can just click again the code lens, and it would then boot up the stuff. And so here you see we have that now or Cypress executor. That's basically the executor here. Which you can see is like the logic that runs behind the scenes. It's like your npm script, right? And so this knows it needs to run Storybook first. So that's exactly what we see right now. And then it runs the actual test.
Dang.
Now, one thing, now let's see whether we actually are lucky and we get a green run already in the first try. But otherwise, like if you do it incrementally, you would pass the --
Okay, Cypress is
watch
booting.
flag to actually see it.
Now, where's it going to open? That's the real question. Opening Cypress.
I think by default it runs it in headless mode. So now we basically see our test running.
So it's running. One passing.
Oh, you're so great. You already got a passing immediately on the first try.
Unbelievable. That's
because usually if you do this incrementally, what you do is that you can pass a watch flag, right? And that would open up the Cypress test runner, where you then see interactively like how the actual test runs. So this is what you would do on CI, because obviously you don't need a live running browser there. But yeah, this basically behind the scenes ran Storybook and ran the tests against that.
That's great. Okay, so yeah, that worked. That did what we wanted. All good. Okay, so there we go. We did it. We now have a test that runs against our shared components, and it tests what we want. It's doing what we want. So
exactly.
Let's
now we could try the whole affected approach which you mentioned before, right? And on this end-to-end test specifically. Right, so we could just commit everything. Because like what the affected commands do is they use the git history to understand, okay, like what are you comparing against, right? Which usually is like you have a feature branch, you have added a couple comments there, and then you basically compare, okay, like since the main branch, like this is what changed. These are the projects that are in those commits. So these are the projects that got affected, right? So that's basically what happens when we run those affected commands.
Okay. So I've got my basic setup here where I've got my, like if we look, the main branch is clear.
Cool. So now we could create some sort of feature branch. Like what would happen like if you create some new feature, right? You would just create a new branch and push it up to.
So we'd call that like, GitHub, new feature, and we'll call it like updated page header so that we can, see it break, right? So then when I'm in here, I would run my site because that's what I would be trying to run. Okay. Then I would decide that I want my site to be, let's see, here's the actual site. So the site is up and running, it's functional. Now I'm going to go make some changes, and the changes that I want to make are actually in here. I'm going to set up the, I'm going to set this up to look a little bit better. So we're going to call this display flex, and we'll justify content, the space between, and then we'll do, that might be enough. Let's see how that looks. Good. Okay. And then I can do like a font family, and we'll do one of these. Okay, great. That looks wonderful. And then these, if we make them display block, we can do text decoration none. Oh, that didn't do what we wanted. Why don't we make this container nav display flex, and we'll give it a gap of like 2 rem. There we go. Okay, that's a header. Pretty. That works. So now we've got a slightly styled header, but then I'm going to break it, right? So I'm going to go into my shared component, and instead of setting the props site title, I'm going to hard code it and say page header, because maybe what I was doing is I was testing and I wanted to make sure that worked. Okay, so I think I'm done. I made this look great.
Yeah, so now we go ahead and commit this, right? So you could just like go ahead and
right. So we got one of those. Let me make this a little bit bigger so we can see what I'm doing. Oh, I needed to
and so the next step would then be that we push this up, right? And we have it set up for CI to run through all the various things, right? So we could actually do that just right after, because it's really, really fast and a nice feature that we added just basically a couple of weeks ago. So to show it locally first, what we could do is we could run a variation of the graph using npx nx again, but use this time affected :graph. So this would not show us just a graph, but actually what got affected by our changes, right? And so now, for instance, if you show all projects here or show affected projects, you see now basically we have in red that shared component. So this is a subset of what changed. Now, I don't think, we don't have anything else right now in the repo, right? So it's
we don't.
So we changed the lowest level library, so everything's kind of affected, right?
Yeah.
But if, for instance, we would have another app or other library besides, right, we wouldn't see that, right, on that affected graph. So this really shows just like what changed. And since like we changed the lowest level in our graph right now, it like walks up and like shows everything is affected.
Okay.
And so now we can actually see we have 2 end-to-end tests, right? Like we have the shared component end-to-ends for our story as well as the site. Now we didn't run the site before, so let's see like what happens. And so if we go back to our terminal, we could then run now our end-to-end test, but only the affected ones. And so to do that, we can run
nx run.
I don't think they are in there. We would need to go to the menu then, I guess. Like if you go to the menu, the nx menu, they're not integrated here. Let's see. You further down, like in the common nx commands, you see affected end-to-end, right? Yeah, exactly. And if you click that one, exactly. So this would run now both, as you can see in the terminal output, it runs the shared components end-to-end as well as the site end-to-end, right?
God,
and these affected commands are for different things, right? Like for the build as well. It's like for the building, you would need that also, right? Or for like running linting against the affected libraries. And so now this basically behind the scenes pushes those up and runs those affected tests.
That is extremely cool. Okay, so, and what I love about this is just how, how many things just worked that I would have had to think about and plan and instrument and put together. And, it like, there's documentation for all this. This is kind of what you were talking about earlier when we were looking at, where were our docs? Here. Tons and tons of documentation on how to make this stuff work. Just really, really cool, like with the generators, and then you've got the different structures here. And I don't have to build that myself, which, oh my goodness, does that change everything?
Actually, like in terms of the generators, I think like are a pretty like a cool part that allows you to learn much quicker, right? And one of my favorite features that we just like landed last week is one that people struggle a lot, especially in monorepos, which is something like setting up CI, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like setting up CI would mean, okay, now I have to think about like how do I parallelize those runs with like affected end-to-end and affected tests and affected builds and whatever, right? And properly leverage those commands correctly. So we could actually try that out if we have time to do that. It's like we just added this week or last week actually a generator that sets up CI for you.
Oh no, what failed? Oh, it was supposed to fail. I was like,
no.
And that, so, but this is working as designed. I screwed up my component, therefore it fixed. So if I come back here and I undo this change and we do the same thing again, or no, I need to do it one more time from over here. Right. Now, while that's running, what was it that you wanted to set up? Sorry.
Yeah, we can actually like after this, we can also do it like once this finishes. Because like one thing people struggle a lot is setting up CI for all that stuff, right? Because like setting up CI for a monorepo is kind of tricky or can be tricky, right? And so we just added the generator last week to automate that fully for you. And so I think that is we didn't like fully announce that yet. Like there's a lot coming on NXConf Lite this week, but that is, I feel like, is a killer feature because like it has a lot of things behind the scenes going on where you don't have to think about. Very much like how we didn't have to think about setting up TypeScript and all those things today when using the workspace.
Now, is that something that you think we can set up in about 2 minutes?
Yeah,
all right.
I think so. We can actually we could stop here. So if you go to the generate again, like the generate command,
generate
for like right up there, exactly, and then you just like type CI. Yeah, and then you click CI workflow. So now you can choose basically CI provider. Let's go for GitHub, for instance.
Okay.
All right, and then basically we can just like run. And so what this does now is you now should have like a .github folder in your workspace. And if you open up CI YAML file here, you see basically a fully functional setup. And this relies on this case, for instance, you can see up there, it relies on some NX Cloud main YAML that it extends from. And this is kind of the powerful setup. So we have in a couple of lines here, we have all those affected commands built in, but not only, right? These run with NX Cloud behind the scenes, meaning that since NX knows like which project depends on what other project, it can also not just like run them in affected in the sense that what changed since last time, but also parallelize it in a proper way, in the most optimal way, right? Because it knows all the dependencies. You can make sure to build first like the lower level nodes in the project graph, and then like add like the apps on top and parallelize what can parallelize because they don't depend on each other, right?
Really cool.
And so I think this is going to be, or this is like, since we landed, is like a killer feature because like there's so much optimization going into these couple lines that otherwise you would have like probably a hard time like setting up on your own. So this is something for people that are interested. Like, definitely come to NXConf Flight this week, as we are going to like show some more stuff around exactly this feature here.
Very, very cool. So yeah, if you're interested in this, make sure you go and sign up for NXConf, which is over here. Let me drop that link one more time for y'all. Okay, I think that's as much as we're going to have time to cover today. I feel like this is just the very beginning of the rabbit hole of how much we could do if we start setting it up. But what I'm really excited about is just how much of the plumbing of things kind of evaporated as we set up this. Because one of the big things that keeps me from, say, writing end-to-end tests in my personal projects is I just get overwhelmed by the idea of writing all this config. And so knowing that I can just run a generate command and there it is, there's all the config, is pretty slick. Like, that makes me pretty happy. And so, you know, I can see myself, maybe this is it. This is the year. 2022 is the year that I become a testing person. Get some tests in that personal site. But Juri, so for folks who want to go deeper and learn more, where should they head next?
Yeah, so the best way to follow along with content we publish, and we have actually a lot in the pipeline right now that we want to push out, is on a Twitter account, NXDevTools. That's where you would get the news once new content is landing. Also on our YouTube channel, which is YouTube/novel_io. That's basically where we currently push out a lot of content. And you also find us on dev.to. We have like a dedicated NX collection. Exactly, if you search for Novel here, exactly this first channel, this is where we push out new video content, also bite-sized short videos, just like covering, I don't know, the CI workflow setup or a single Storybook generate command. So this is the best place to kind of learn. Yeah.
Great.
Or just also ping me on Twitter. Always happy to help out.
All right. So I'll drop Juri's Twitter one more time. Make sure you go and give him a follow. And one more shout out to the captioning. We've had Vanessa with us here all day doing the live captioning from White Coat Captioning. Thank you very much. And that's made possible through the support of our sponsors, Netlify, NX, and Backlight, all kicking in to make this show more accessible, which I appreciate very, very much. While you're checking out things on the site, we got the schedule updated, and we've got a lot of really fun stuff coming up. So make sure you come back on Thursday. We're going to have Mishko Hevry on. We're going to talk about building resumable apps, which is a phrase that is new to me, using Quick. And so Quick is a front-end framework, and it's very focused on this idea of like zero JavaScript and fine-grained lazy loading, which looks pretty cool. I'm excited to learn more. Next week, I'm going to do a solo episode. We're going to learn a little bit about Netlify Edge functions. That's going to be a lot of fun. And then Johannes Schickling, who's the founder of Prisma, or one of the founders of Prisma, is working on something interesting called Content Layer. I don't know much about it, but it seems cool, and I always like to see what Johannes is up to, so we're going to go check that out. And then we're also going to talk, that is the wrong... Got to figure out who we screwed something up in our entry there, but we're going to look at converting code into Figma UI kits as well, which is going to be really, really cool. So lots of exciting stuff going on, and just a lot to look forward to here. So yeah, y'all, it's going to be a good time. Make sure you go and check out that schedule. You can subscribe on Google Calendar or on Twitch or on YouTube, wherever you prefer to spend your time. With that, I think we're going to call this one a win. Juri, any final words, parting words for the chat?
No, thanks. It was great fun be on the show, and yeah, totally. Like as I mentioned, like if you are interested in X, definitely give it a go. Ping me on Twitter if you need help to get started, and yeah, have fun.
Awesome. All right, y'all. We're going to call this one a win. Thank you all very much. Chat, stay tuned. We're going to go find somebody to raid. We will see you all next time.